and we've decided it's time for another mashup episode. So I want to start by giving an update on the Israel-Iran situation because things are obviously tense as fuck, and everyone's kind of waiting to see what Israel's going to do next. So we already know Iran launched a retaliatory attack on Israel last Saturday. This involved over 300 missiles and drones, and the majority of them were successfully intercepted by forces from Israel, the United States, Britain, France, and Jordan. And even though the attack didn't end up causing massive damage or high death tolls, and despite pleas from Biden for Israel to show restraint and not escalate the situation further, Netanyahu ended up summoning his war cabinet on Monday and threatened to respond to the attack. So then Iran follows up with their own warning, saying if Israel decides to strike back, they're going to respond immediately. And a spokesperson from Iran's National Security and Foreign Policy Committee told Al Mayadeen News, quote, "We are ready to use weapons we have not used before. We have plans for all scenarios," end quote. Iran's deputy foreign minister, Ali Bagheri Khani, also gave a televised address stating that the response would not take days this time and would instead be executed in, quote, less than a few seconds, end quote. And Iran's president, Ibrahim Raisi, I hope I said that right, said that Saturday's attack was a limited one, and he vowed a, quote, massive and harsh response to completely destroy Israel if they proceed with even the tiniest invasion of Iran. So meetings have been taking place all week with leaders of various countries that are allies of Israel. They're all trying to persuade Netanyahu to come up with alternative plans that don't involve a counterstrike attack. But on Wednesday, Netanyahu gave a statement and basically said, quote, Israel will do whatever it needs to defend itself, end quote. And in response to the input from all these other world leaders, Netanyahu said, quote, they have all sorts of suggestions and advice. I appreciate that, but I want to be clear, our decisions we will make ourselves, end quote. So meanwhile, back in the United States, GOP lawmakers have been questioning Biden's foreign policy toward Iran and Russia because apparently the Biden admin has allowed a series of sanction waivers permitting Iran and Russia to engage in joint nuclear work together to expire. So up until now, they've been completely non-committal, the Biden admin, towards renewing or enforcing the sanctions. I read a series of articles in the Washington Free Beacon. It talked about how these waivers allowed for more than $10 billion in profits for Russia state-controlled firms to work at Iran's various nuclear plants, including like contested military sites that were suspected of housing Iran's atomic weapon programs. And these sanction waivers expired at the end of last year. And even while they were in place, Iran started hiding portions of their nuclear program from international inspectors. And then earlier this month, Iran announced plans to expand its Russian-made nuclear power plant, Bushehr, which is apparently a suspected weapon site. They also made a $50 billion investment in other facilities. Construction's supposed to start in May, and they've already broken ground on 4 new nuclear power plants early this year. And they've been enriching their uranium levels close to weapons-grade fuel. So according to Representative Michael McCaul, who's the chair of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Biden's basically been like giving significant financial relief to entice Iran to agree to a new nuclear deal. And when asked why the waivers were allowed to expire in the first place, the U.S. State Department wouldn't give any kind of answer and merely said they were, quote, reviewing the waiver as part of the regular review process, and a public comment would only be given once a decision was made as part of the review, end quote. But it seems that the recent escalation of the conflict between Israel and Iran has lit a fire under Biden's ass because on Wednesday, the White House announced that they're going to impose new sanctions on Iran's missile and drone program in the hopes of deterring Tehran from another hostile attack against Israel and U.S. allies. So basically, we have Biden saying that our support for Israel is rock solid. And then we did indeed help them intercept the attack from Iran. But then Biden immediately turns around and says, we're not going to be part of any response because we don't want to escalate things. And at the same time, we're supporting nuclear efforts in Iran with the aid of Russian funding, but we don't want to be involved. Like the whole thing is one giant contradiction. And Stephanie, I called it on Monday's episode. Remember when I said our allies are going to start questioning the role of the US in global politics?
Yep.
So this morning, I read an article in the Washington Examiner, and it's talking about how Biden's mixed response to the Israel Iran conflict is now being talked about in NATO, especially in terms of how we're handling this as opposed to how we're handling the conflict in Ukraine. And there's this guy, Kurt Volker. He's a former U.S. ambassador to NATO. And he told reporters, he said, quote, "You have a lot of NATO allies, Poland, the Baltic states. They're scratching their heads and saying, well, what will happen if Putin attacks us? Is the U.S. going to tell us don't fight back? They're not going to attack Russia," end quote. So what is the response from the Biden admin? Well, according to State Department spokesman Matthew Miller, Israel is a non NATO ally of the US, and Ukraine's just different because we had, prearranged agreements with Israel, but we didn't have them with Ukraine prior to the start of the conflict. And we don't want to be in a direct arms conflict with Russia because that's not in the best interest of the American people, and we don't want World War III. Well, I agree with that. But Stephanie, it's like we say, I swear, every episode, like, despite whatever nonsense excuses and justifications this administration comes up with, the bottom line is we just look fucking weak and non-committal, and every other country sees this. And every day we just get closer and closer to Biden dragging, or I would say more accurately, shuffling us closer to World War III. And in my opinion, it doesn't look like the Israel, Palestine, and now added Iran conflict is going to be subsiding anytime soon. It also doesn't look like the Ukraine-Russia conflict is going to be subsiding anytime soon because none of these countries are backing down. They are all firm in their stances, and their leaders are all sending clear messages, not the mumble-jumble garbage and contradictory statements that come from our, quote, leader, Biden. And I'm sorry, but America has no fucking balls with this administration in place, and everyone knows it. And meanwhile, we have a shit show going on in our own country, and we're still having these constant pro-Palestinian protests taking place all over the country.
Yeah. Well, these countries are definitely going to take advantage of a weak president as much as they can. And, it's like just when I started sympathizing with like the Palestinian people and the genocide that's happening and all of that, these leftist loonies start pulling these stupid stunts with their idiotic protests and completely turn me off from the whole cause. So get this, protesters, pro-Palestinian protesters, blocked traffic on the Golden Gate Bridge for 3 hours. Can you imagine? Like, I would have a full-blown panic attack if I was stuck in a bridge for 3 hours. And listen to this. Okay, these protesters stuck their hands in oil drums and filled it with cement. Like, how fucking stupid can you be?
It's like the ones that glued their hands to the tarmac at the airport.
Yeah. I mean, that just goes to show, like, you lose all credibility at that point because, like, you're just stupid. Like, no one's going to listen to you. And one of the protesters was waving a Hezbollah flag. So, like, clearly they're supporting terrorism. And so I see this video of the paramedics that are like helping their protesters free their arms. And this one guy is like screaming at the paramedics, accusing the paramedics of hurting him. And like at one point, his arm was free, but his dumbass was like taking his hand and holding on, like gripping the pipe. And the medic kept saying, just let go of the pipe and you'll be fine. Like just let go and you can go free. And the guy's like continuing to hold on to this pipe and is like screaming at the crowd, he's hurting me. He's hurting me. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, you're the one that gets yourself into this stupid situation. And then you're going to turn around and accuse the person that's helping you of hurting you. Like, that's what we're dealing with. It's just complete like idiots. And the same thing went on in Chicago, where people were literally abandoning their cars and walking to the airport because they were going to miss their flight since protesters were blocking traffic once again for hours. And of course, in these liberal cities, the cops can't really do anything. They're told to just like let them protest. And you know what? That's not how things work down here in Florida because they tried pulling this crap in Florida. The pro-Palestinian protesters put all of their arms in like these PVC pipes to basically form like a human blockade and block traffic. And so the police just went and grabbed them and carried them off the street and threw them on the ground. Like, problem solved. That's how it's done. And that's how it should be done. And I'm just glad that at least I live in a place that has common sense. But like, here's the thing. If you want to go and you want to protest about genocide outside of Biden's house or in DC or like something like that, go for it. And maybe people will listen and you started to get a lot of people to pay attention. But when you go and block traffic for hours on the Golden Gate Bridge or block people from getting to the airport in Chicago, that's not going to get anyone on your side. Like you lose people. And I just don't understand like how they think that pissing off a bunch of people that have nothing to do with the situation is supposed to help. It's like you're preventing people that actually have jobs and contribute to society from getting to work. Like it's stupid and it turns people away from the cause. And like just imagine too if there was an emergency. Like what if someone had a heart attack? What if someone went into labor and they can't get through because there's traffic everywhere? And it's just crazy. So the case of like the Golden Gate Bridge, of course, is in California, obviously. And so the 26 protesters that blocked it haven't actually been charged with anything because that's how things go in California. Criminals win and law-abiding citizens pay the price. But I think this is like the most ridiculous protest we've seen so far, so I had to share it. But speaking of crime, we've got to talk about the new trial that Trump is in. It's like ridiculous trying to keep track of all of them. But this judge is so biased, obviously, because it's New York City, and he's refusing to let Trump go to his son's high school graduation because court is scheduled. And he's requiring Trump to be in court like constantly. So it's like basically 4 days a week, all day. He's going to be in court instead of being able to go and campaign. Like, how is this not election interference? And the fact that the judge is making him miss his son's graduation, I think really shows just how hateful these people are and how it is bias and it is just politics. And I just want to bring up like the case has never been brought criminally before, ever. So again, they're setting a new precedent with Trump just to try to get him. And basically what they're saying is that he didn't properly report the hush money to Stormy Daniels. So the hush money was actually paid by Trump privately out of his private account, which it should be. But now they're saying, well, you should have taken it from the campaign funds. But that doesn't make any sense because if you took it from the campaign funds, then that would have been a crime. But they're trying to say it's a crime that he took it from his private account because then it wasn't reported. So it's just like they will do anything to try to get him. And I do want to point out, in case anyone still thinks that this whole thing is legitimate and Trump did have some affair with Stormy Daniels, she herself has come out multiple times saying it never happened. And the lawyer that brought that whole case is now barred from practicing law because he has a record of extorting money from high-profile figures with made-up allegations. So it's like it was just a thing to get money, but the Democrats are just running with it. So anyhow, now he's going to miss his son's graduation and be off the campaign trail because of this. But once again, I think it's winning more people over. More people want to support him. And this was crazy. So after court, he goes over to the Bronx and people were lined all the way down the street, just like they do here in Florida, chanting 4 more years. And there were like bodega owners talking to him and they were telling him how they have to deal with multiple shoplifters every single day in their stores. The crime is just completely out of control. The latest story is that people are riding around on scooters in the Bronx and shooting people. One person was actually killed because of this. And then there's also this like sick new trend in New York City of men randomly punching women in the face, like in broad daylight for no reason. So people are just sick and tired of the crime and what their city has become. And I think that's why so many people showed up in the Bronx to support Trump. And there's also some other good news for Trump because he broke the record with the most votes ever recorded in New Hampshire's primary election. That's a really big deal, especially in New Hampshire. So things are looking good. Like it's actually a really good sign. And it's like I say, go ahead, keep taking him to court because that's how he's going to win. More and more people are realizing what they're doing. So something else was revealed this week. This week was like crazy with court and hearings. There's like so much going on. So try to stick with me for a second, okay? There was a hearing on the 2020 election. And in this hearing, it was revealed that former Attorney General Bill Barr ordered investigators to stand down when they were investigating Jesse Morgan's claims that hundreds of thousands of completed mail-in ballots were hauled across state lines. So this is Trump's Attorney General that turned against him and told them to stand down and to stop investigating it. So it's like the truth is starting to seep out, and more people are starting to support Trump. And like the deep state is revealing itself. And there was a House committee hearing as well this week where you had whistleblowers from the National Guard talking about January 6th. So I want to play a clip from that hearing. This is from Colonel Earl Matthews.
Because two senior general officers of the United States Army, General Charles A. Flynn and Lieutenant General Walter E. Pyatt, have acted contrary to those values. Generals Pyatt and Flynn have lied to Congress, to federal investigators, and to the American people about why it took so long for the District of Columbia National Guard to deploy to the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021. Their distortions contributed to a deeply and fundamentally flawed Department of Defense Inspector General investigation and to deficiencies in other official inquiries. On January 6, 2021, I was on duty and present during numerous conversations, video conferences, and phone calls leading up to, during, and after the riot, which was engulfing the Capitol. When I say these general officers lied, I do not do so lightly or cavalierly. I speak from personal knowledge, having interacted with them on January 6th in my official military capacity. Unfortunately, some senior officials in the Department of the Army and the Department of Defense have sought to protect or to promote Generals Flynn and Pyatt. These senior civilian officials have excused, condoned, or overlooked the misconduct of these officers. As a former acting general counsel of the Department of the Army and as chief legal officer, I take these matters seriously, even if others don't. I'm glad the subcommittee has an open mind and is committed to the dogged search for the truth. In my formal statement, which I provided to the committee in advance of today's hearing, I detailed General Pyatt's and General Flynn's intentional misrepresentations to the Congress and to federal investigators. During today's hearing, I hope to discuss with you how they lied, where they lied, and in my opinion, why they lied.
Okay, so that's one of the whistleblowers. And then I have a clip of the other whistleblower, which is Sergeant Major Michael F. Brooks. So let me play his clip real quick.
Not anonymous witnesses or anonymous officials, but senior ranking military members that were in the room, on the calls, and on the secure video teleconference. I'm not here to disparage the Army that I love and served for nearly 3 decades, but to correct the record and speak for the hundreds of enlisted soldiers and airmen of the DC National Guard who have always answered the call to serve without political bias or prejudice, who have always faithfully fulfilled their oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Those Capitol Guardians who continue to do so even today after being degraded by senior officials of the Army and the Army staff in their inaccurate and biased report. I believe those who steered the narrative of the DODIG report did so not for historical documentation or to enhance future military response capability, but to protect and advance individuals who sought to shield themselves from responsibility, to overly enhance their role and perceived significance in a critical moment in the history of our nation's democracy. In truth, their actions, no matter how innocent they believe them to be, have led to an awful mark on our military and shown an incredible lack of respect for the service of the men and women who serve in the DC National Guard before, during, and after January 6th, 2021. Trust in our Army's most senior leadership was lost. Their actions and comments have highlighted the Army staff and the Secretary of the Army's lack of knowledge and understanding of the DC National Guard, its authorities, and capabilities. Prior to the protests following the murder of George Floyd in May of 2020, I do not believe any of them understood just how unique the DC National Guard is and the responsibility that is delegated from the President to the Secretary of Defense and further delegated to the Secretary of the Army. I believe it is this lack of understanding that led to the significant delays in the military response on January 6th. I will not sit here today and say if we had been given authority to immediately respond when Chief Sun, the Chief of the Capitol Police, made that first frantic call for support at 1:49 p.m., that we would have prevented the breach of the Capitol. What I can tell you with absolute certainty is that we had a force equipped and ready to respond. And despite the inaccuracies of the DODIG report, we had a plan and would have liked the opportunity to try. Instead, we waited for hours, less than 2 miles east of the knowing our capital had been breached and not understanding why we had not received the authorization to respond. I cannot tell you the number of times someone has asked me, where were you? Where was the National Guard? Or how can you call yourselves Capitol Guardians? There's no easy response to those questions, and the truth is, we were there and we were ready. We just weren't authorized to respond, and that is difficult to explain.
So
Okay,
go
I
ahead.
just got to say first, I totally understand what that guy's saying. Do you know how many times I was there was like skirmish lines going on and rocks and bottles being thrown and riots and protests. And because I worked the quote elite unit, we were told to stand down, and we'd be like 4 or 5 blocks away listening to officers putting out help calls and all this chaos going on. But because we had the horses and they were far too threatening, like we were a very, very, very last resort that was hardly ever used. And just sitting there, like listening to him talk about that, like I could feel it because I totally get what he's saying.
Yeah. At one point, he got really choked up over it. And I mean, it is crazy. It's like they're saying that these generals and like the report that was done, it's all a lie. And like they were there, they were ready, they had a plan, they were told to stand down. And once again, it just shows that there is this narrative that's been hidden of what really happened that day, and that, they were trying to instigate it. Like, I really think the FBI and the CIA, like, we know they had plain clothed agents in the crowd instigating things. And, you had people here that could have stopped it, and they were told to stand down.
Yeah.
So along with the whole January 6th thing, also this week, the Supreme Court is hearing a case on a certain statute that would allow the January 6th defendants to be sentenced to 20 years in prison for, quote, obstructing a congressional proceeding, end quote. So Supreme Court Justice Gorsuch brought up multiple instances in which Democrats obstructed a congressional hearing. So he brought up the sit-ins at the Justice Kavanaugh trial, the fire alarm that was pulled by Representative Bowman that delayed a vote, the pro-Palestinian protests at the Capitol, and then, of course, the BLM riots. So he asked, like, well, shouldn't they get 20 years as well if you're trying to say that this statute should be applied? And I love that a justice is calling out the total hypocrisy of the left, because that's exactly what it is. And this case, like, it has huge implications for not just the January 6ers, but also for Trump. And so I think it's important to know that the January 6th defendants, as well as Trump, they were never charged with insurrection. Not one single person has been charged with insurrection. And I think that says it all. This was not an insurrection like the media claims. So if that's the case, why are these people still sitting in jail years later for obstruction? Like, how insane is that? And so this Supreme Court verdict is expected by the end of June. And I'm really hoping that the justices do the right thing, considering it's a conservative majority. But we'll see. Hopefully these January 6ers get justice after all.
Yeah, but notice how we have all these ongoing trials and they're all slated to have verdicts in the middle of the summer, or
Yeah.
what I will be calling riot season, because
Ugh.
depending on
Yeah.
how these verdicts end up, that's what's going to happen. And good on Gorsuch, because he's right. And funny how the response from the DOJ Solicitor General, Prelogar, was to refer to these very legitimate situations that actually happened as hypothetical. And she told him, quote, "To the extent that your hypotheticals are pressing on the idea of a peaceful protest, even one that's quite disruptive, it's not clear to me that the government would be able to show that each of these protesters had corrupt intent," end quote. Like, really? Because we already know the government had no problem showing corrupt intent when it came to the J6 protesters, including spending hours upon hours combing video footage and conducting illegal surveillance efforts to identify and literally persecute people just for being at the Capitol. But like you said, as usual, the rules just don't apply to the left. Like, no matter how blatantly obvious the hypocrisy is, it doesn't seem to matter. And I just hope enough people are waking up to the bullshit and seeing what's happening. But speaking of bullshit, Stephanie, so remember on Monday, we talked about what the fuck is up with House Speaker Mike Johnson. And as predicted, it seems he has indeed changed his position about adamantly not supporting aid for Ukraine unless it was tied to funding our own border, because on Wednesday, he introduced a bill that includes $61 billion for Ukraine, $26 billion for Israel, and $8 billion for Indo-Pacific aid. And in order to get full Democratic support, the bill also includes $9 billion in humanitarian aid for Gaza, which Senate Democrats have said is a non-negotiable. So what's going on with our border? No fucking clue, because Johnson says he's planning to release an independent border security bill that's going to be voted on separately at a later time, which again, total 180 in what he had been saying for months on end. But according to AP News, the funding that's included in the border bill, that we don't know what it actually is yet, but supposedly the funding is going to be the same as what was already rejected by the Senate. And so House Republicans are calling this plan like a strategy of complete failure. But surprise, surprise, like, who is strongly supporting this move and pushing forward with this foreign aid package that doesn't include US border security? Biden. He gave a statement almost immediately afterwards and said, quote, "The House must pass the package this week and the Senate should quickly follow. I will sign this into law immediately to send a message to the world. We stand with our friends and we won't let Iran or Russia succeed," end quote. And so, as usual, Congress is proving to be nothing but a fucking clown show. The House met for several hours, apparently well into the night on Tuesday. Johnson was arguing with Republicans that he's a wartime House leader and he will not be resigning, and that the move to oust him is absurd and not helpful. And he said, like, the bottom line is either the House passes the package he's proposing, or they risk facing a discharge petition from Democrats that would force a vote on their preferred package instead. And then AP News reported that as part of this foreign aid push, Johnson said House members will have the opportunity to vote on a variety of foreign policy proposals, including allowing the U.S. to seize frozen Russian central bank assets, like we talked about on Monday, placing sanctions on Iran, Russia, and China, and potentially banning TikTok. And this aid package for Ukraine is also pushing the Biden admin to provide long-range Army tactile missile systems to Ukraine so that they can target Russian supply lines. And so far, we haven't given these particular weapons to Ukraine out of concerns that Moscow is going to see that as an like escalation move. So once again, here we are moving potential steps closer to World War III.
I am fully convinced that that is the plan, that they will move us into World War III before this election. Like, people need to wake the fuck up and start paying attention to these spending bills. Right now, we are $34 trillion in debt, an amount that I don't think anyone can truly fathom. And we're currently only able to pay the interest payment on that debt. So why the fuck are we giving any aid to other countries at this point? Like, think about it. Let's say that you're in so much credit card debt that you can only afford the interest payment each month. Would you turn around and donate thousands of dollars to charities? No, of course not. So why is our government doing this? It's just, it boggles my mind. And I really feel like we need to vote everyone out. Anyone that's up for reelection, get them the hell out of there. These career politicians are destroying our country. And they're never going to agree to term limits, but that doesn't mean we can't get rid of them. Like, we can vote them out. And I think people need to start paying attention to who their congressmen are instead of just focusing on like the presidential candidate. So that's just where I stand on that. But meanwhile, have you noticed that there is constant footage of Gaza? And like, the moment the Iranian missiles were sent, there was constant live footage. I mean, they were live recording all of it. We see a ton of people every day that are there, that are posting videos of their situation on TikTok. But have you noticed that in over 2 years of this war in Ukraine, we have seen virtually no footage?
Yep.
Like, why is that? And the reason I'm asking is because I was on TikTok and there was this American woman who was in Ukraine filming the nightlife of this war-torn country. And I mean, it looked like a night in Vegas. It was bustling. People were laughing. There were like a ton of people out partying. Yet the media and the government tells us, well, all the young people are dead. But like, here, the city looked clean. It looked orderly. It sure didn't look like anything like what's happening in Gaza. And I'm really starting to question, like, is there even a war taking place? Like, where is it? Why haven't we seen any footage? Like, don't you think that's weird? In over 2 years, there's nothing. Yet we're getting all of this footage out of the Middle East that doesn't even have internet connection half of the time. And Don Jr. also posed this question right when the war in Gaza began. And there were like, you know, all these posts and footage, and it was all over the news. And he asked the same question. And I think he was hinting at something. And I think we need some answers as to like what the hell is really happening.
Yeah.
But is it just me? Like, that's weird, right?
You're 100% correct. And yet, all we keep hearing is Russia, 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 Russia. They have an edge. We need to keep sending weapons to Ukraine. We need to keep sending munitions and money and everything else to Ukraine because Russia keeps advancing and they're going to take over Europe. And you're
Right.
absolutely right. Where's the footage of like what's really happening there? You'll
And they said they
occasionally
wiped out a
see,
whole generation, yet there were all
yes,
these people in their 20s partying. They certainly weren't in uniform or like out at war. They were like partying. And I mean, it literally looked like a normal situation where nothing's going on. Very strange. I need answers. Like, I need answers. This is weird. Okay, so this is like totally off topic, but I have to bring it up because it has to do with chemtrails. So the other big news this week is like the extreme flooding in Dubai. And this is flooding that is causing ceilings to collapse, cars to float away, and I mean, massive damage. I think they said the whole mall is destroyed. So Bloomberg Politics posted, quote, the heavy rains that caused widespread flooding across the desert nation stemmed partly from cloud seeding, end quote. So it's known that Dubai has started cloud seeding. And I mean, how else are you going to explain like constant rain in the desert if there's not cloud seeding? But apparently they seeded a little too much because what happened is they got a year and a half's worth of rain in one day. And they're saying that's not even the worst of it. They're saying another storm is rolling in that's supposed to be even worse. People are literally being washed down the road in their cars. Flights are canceled. The videos, oh my gosh, you guys have to go and see the videos on TikTok that people are posting of this storm. It looks like the storm of the century. Like it looks like the apocalypse. And the Independent reported so far, at least 20 people have been killed. And authorities are warning that even more severe weather is to come. And I just think it's funny how like we get censored for talking about chemtrails and cloud seeding, yet Bloomberg can post about it and their posts aren't being removed. And I'd also like to point out that it's right on Wikipedia where it says, quote, the United Arab Emirates is one of the first countries in the Persian Gulf region to use cloud seeding technology. Forecasters and scientists have estimated that cloud seeding operations can enhance rainfall by as much as 30 to 35% in a clear atmosphere and up to 10 to 15% in a more humid atmosphere. This practice has caused concerns regarding the impact on the environment because it is difficult to predict the long-term global implications, end quote. So why is it still being treated like a conspiracy when clearly, I mean, it's very obvious this is not a conspiracy. It's really happening. And you don't have a freaking tsunami apocalyptic storm in the desert without some kind of cloud seeding behind it.
Stephanie, it's not cloud seeding that's causing massive rain and flooding, at least not according to quote science. So there's this guy, Ryan Mao. He's a private meteorologist and he's the former chief scientist at the US National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And he very emphatically stated, quote, this is most certainly not cloud seeding. If that occurred with cloud seeding, they'd have water all the time. You can't create rain out of thin air and get 6 inches of water, end quote. And then he went on to say that maybe we're affecting the atmosphere long term with cloud seeding, but we're not capable of controlling individual rainstorms. So, of course, the heavy rains in Dubai are being blamed on what? Climate change. And according to Frederic Otto, a climate scientist at the Imperial College of London, he said focusing on cloud seeding is misleading because the true culprit here is global warming. Just like every other government manufactured crisis, this is being blamed on climate change. And while I do believe that Mother Nature can be a devastatingly unpredictable and destructive bitch, we have also talked extensively on this podcast about known multiple experiments with weather modification like cloud seeding that have produced catastrophic results, including severe storms and flooding that has wiped out communities and killed hundreds of people. So I'm sorry, but I'm just not buying the climate change narrative.
And the own government admits it. It's on
Yeah.
their website. Like, I don't understand why. I mean, I guess they think if they say it enough times, people are just going to be too dumb and like just believe it. I don't know. But like, of course, they're not going to admit that they over cloud seeded because look at how much property is damaged. Like, you think the government wants to be held liable for that? No, they're going to say
And
like,
it's
oh, it was Mother Nature.
and it's expensive property. Like,
Hmm.
isn't Dubai like the millionaire's playground?
It's like the richest place in the world. No, not even
Yeah,
millionaires, billionaires. Like,
billionaires.
yeah. So of course they're not going to admit it. But I saw something really funny this morning, and so I'm going to throw it in at the end because I feel like we just need something funny to end the day with. Um, so Biden has another lie that he's telling now. Apparently, he doesn't have enough fake stories. He had to make another one where in a press conference, he said that his uncle died from being eaten by cannibals. I'm not even kidding. Like, it's out there. You can find the
Oh my
clip.
God.
And it's not true whatsoever. His uncle died while flying over the ocean and like his aircraft crashed. He was in the military or whatever. He was not eaten by cannibals, but that's for some reason a story that Biden thinks is good to tell. I don't know how that's going to help him in the election, but yeah, he's out there making up crazy shit. So we should be a little more concerned.
It's like, okay, we know he has dementia. That's clear. But there's dementia lies, and then there's just like lies, right?
Like cannibals. Like what?
Like my grandma had dementia and she had lots of stories about how, she and my grandfather knew Frank Sinatra and the Rat Pack and all this other stuff. And we appeased her because she was old and had dementia. But this is next level to me.
Yeah.
This is just, I mean, he's been lying his entire life. And now with the dementia, he can't like even fathom what is truth and what is fiction.
Oh yeah, he has no idea like what world we're even living in and like
Uh,
what does cannibalism have to do with anything. But yeah, that's our president. So everyone can have a good laugh over that. And yeah, we'll keep everyone posted on all the hearings and the stuff going on. I think the tides are turning. I think a lot of people are waking up, and I think Trump will win in a landslide if there's not like, all kinds of fraud, which there probably will be.
he hasn't announced his running mate yet either, huh?
No,
No.
it's driving me
Okay.
crazy. I guess they usually don't announce till like the summer, which
Okay.
I thought it was earlier than that. But yeah, I would love to know. It's like driving me crazy, and I hope it's someone good. But he's gonna have to because he's gonna be in court all the time. So he's gonna need someone out there campaigning on his behalf.
Exactly.
Oh my gosh. All right. Well, the craziness will continue and we'll be back with more stories. But I hope everyone has a great day and thanks for tuning in.